What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here, man. And I got a guy next to me who has been on the show before. As I told you guys last episode, a guy I really, really respect in this space. And I couldn't think of a better guest to get to preview the North Carolina A&T Aggies. My guy, Jamie Walker, was on the HBCU roundtable a while back. This guy does it all, man. Contributor for the Black College Sports Network, play-by-play social media guy who's all over HBCU Twitter, man. Jamie, I know you got a very, very, very busy schedule right now as the season approaches. So I just appreciate you giving me some of your time and coming on the show.
Blue, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, but we got to get into A&T, man. I thought this was a team. I picked a few teams I thought deserved solo previews, and this is one of them because there's a lot of question marks, a lot of hype around this team. But let's get to last year, man. The A&T is not used to having the season they had last year. Let's just be honest. A losing record is not historically what Aggie fans want to see. So for you, looking at the team last year, what was missing for North Carolina A&T for you, and what did you see happening that led the season to go down the path that it did?
Well, I think I think for the fan base and for just Aggie Nation in general, and then people just followers of the team. I think coming off of a canceled season in the COVID year, and then getting back into the flow of things, I think that really hampered the team. But along with that, if you just look at the football team itself, changing conferences, going from the MEAC to the Big South, I'm a firm believer uh, in having to recruit and get the players for the conference that you're in, and so going somewhere new, it's not necessarily the norm to just go in there and dominate it from the rip. So I think it was unfair by some people um, to just get down on this team because they're changing conferences. You have to consider everything that was factored in. But I guess that's the norm when you've been successful for so long, and you've set a standard, and people expect you to maintain that standard regardless of what goes on.
And I think another thing, I talked about this on one of the live streams I've had. I got to Big South Media Day really early as I was traveling, and I was sitting in a room with a lot of the players before the media was there, and they were just kind of chopping it up, talking. Jacob Roberts was in there and a few other A&T guys, and they talked about something that I don't think a lot of schools had to deal with. Usually, when a school comes into a conference, they're looked down upon. I don't think Bryant has a big target coming into the Big South this year. I don't think Monmouth has a big target on them coming going into the CAA, etc. But A&T had a giant target in the Big South year one because of their success. The same way I think of, you can look at a Kennesaw State has a giant target going to the ASUN this year because they have a history of winning. Like one of the defensive players from one of the schools, I don't want to put their name out there, but he was talking about how what Jermaine Martin said about I'm going to get 2,000 yards rushing really rubbed a lot of defensive guys the wrong way across the conference, where they said, okay, you think you're going to come into our conference and put up 2,000 on us? They were like, that's not happening. So every game there was a little bit of added motivation to say this new team who thinks they're going to come in here and beat us and that we aren't to the standard that they're used to playing, we're going to have to show them. And I think Jacob Roberts even talked about the physicality in the trenches really is what's kind of separated the previous tenure in the MEAC to the Big South, which I don't think there's a huge gap in terms of talent between the conferences, but he just said it was a change of pace. And I think A&T playing with the target year one is something that I don't think they were ready for. I don't think a lot of fans really realize that those teams in the Big South were really, really gunning for A&T and looking at them as someone that they were going to have to prove wrong.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, especially when you consider the success of A&T beating, out of conference. Their out of conference schedule was always pretty good, and they would beat some of those teams. They had beaten the Charleston Southerns, the Kent States, the East Carolinas. So, you know, the Big South is still of the same region, and so they've noticed that too. And so, coming in with the brashness of an A&T, and I can speak to that, that Aggie arrogance to a degree, but it's merited when it comes to the success. But you can't come into a conference like the Big South, bragging and not expect them to punch back. But we'll see what happens this year, as year two in this conference, last year in this conference, and I think you'll see some different things this year, because I think they know the expectations. You get a full spring. You're not coming off COVID, and I think the everything's off. The handcuffs are off. Here, let's go play ball.
And one thing I wanted to ask about before we move on to the quarterback position is one of the position groups that Sam Washington was very, very vocal when I spoke to him at Big South Media Day was the secondary. He pretty much went as far to say that that was their biggest weakness in terms of a team, and that they could not stop good passing teams from moving the football through the air. For you, did you kind of get that same? Did you have that same feeling about the defense? Is that the secondary really just didn't have the guys to go out there and play? And this offseason, do you feel like A&T's reloaded that secondary going into 2022?
Absolutely. I think both in scheme and in personnel. They had a lot of injured personnel last year that affected the passing game. I think also when you're talking about conference foes, the passing games itself was a little bit different. The MEAC style of play was not that high wire act that you saw. It was balanced attacks. If you just go down the line with the South Carolina States, the Morgan States, it's ground and pound. So I think the secondary for A&T this year will be much better. You got Karan Prunty that's coming back, Amir McKinnell. You have a couple other stalwarts that'll go out there and definitely be part of that. But along with that, a new secondaries coach in Jason McCronos. And I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but
Yeah.
he's hit the ground running as far as his recruiting and just the standard that he's setting. You see him all over social media, and really, I think he gives a breath of fresh air. That's not all with the personnel changes defensively. I'll talk about it now with one of the strengths in the group, the defensive line, and Keith Willis coming in. Anybody that knows football knows Keith Willis from back in the day, Pittsburgh Steel, and was real close to Sam Washington. Uh, Coach Washington really preached discipline as really one of the major downfalls with the team overall. And I think defensively, you'll see a lot more disciplined unit this year, especially in the secondary where they gave up a lot of big plays. You're talking about a defense who perennially was in the in the 10s, 15s, 20s, dropped not horribly, but was not that same standard. I think they were in the 30s, 39 this year, if I'm not mistaken, in defense. But that's not the standard that Blue Death defense has set for so many years. So I think the secondary, along with his defensive line, the linebackers, should be much improved this year and give A&T really a leg up going into conference play.
And I think I echo that, and even Coach Washington was saying that he feels like they brought in more depth too, where they could have a rotation, play more guys in that secondary, and I think with the exit of Kennesaw, especially, you're going to see a lot more pass heavy. I would say play in the Big South Conference because I think outside of Kennesaw, everyone really spread the ball out to the best of their ability and all had pretty good quarterbacks to do it, especially a team like Charleston Southern. They can throw the football now. And so I think with Kennesaw's departure, I think that building up that secondary was very important. But the quarterback position is one of every time I talk to a North Carolina A&T fan, media, anything, the development of Jalen Fowler always seems to come up. For you, what did you see from him last year that was promising? And what are some things that you want to see Fowler do better going into 2022?
Well, size, and arm strength are some of the pluses when it comes to Jalen Fowler. You have to understand that in the last few years, the line of quarterbacks that they did have was really versatile. You're talking about a few years ago with Lamar Raynard, perennial winner, 3-4 year starter, winning Celebration Bowls and really leading their offense. And then you turn the reins over to Khalil Carter in the last full season. They had a different kind of quarterback, 5'10", you know kind of a fullback mode. He you would always get the laughs from people, but would come in and be able to run that offense as well, that Chris Barnett offense. And so Jalen Fowler, again, coming off the COVID year, stepping into that spot being brand new, it was new for him. He had to have, growing pains. And so you saw some bright spots in his ability to be able to lead the offense, be able to run the ball. I think they averaged about 189 yards passing. The running game fell off, so it was on his shoulders a little bit more. than maybe he was accustomed to. So I think, again, if he can just go through his progressions, be able to take what a defense gives him and not, not turn the ball over, I think he'll be fine. He's a quality signal caller. But I tell you what, you have a battle when it comes to that position. I don't think I've ever seen where the potential, or where even a coach has spoken about the potential of four quarterbacks on a roster potentially getting time. You're talking about, Fowler up there. Of course, being in the catbird seat right now, I think it's his job to lose. But again, you have a kid that was highly touted last year in Zach Yeager that, out of Minnesota, who had some time last year and really showed flashes as well, who was more than capable of leading this offense. So I think when you have people pushing them, you have the freshman Eli Brickhamble, who you know during the spring game absolutely could spin it in his limited time. Of course, true freshman, not really having a lot of experience on the collegiate level. But again, you saw the potential. And then Austin Hooker, if those familiar with the Hooker last name, look no further than the University of Tennessee, and of course his father being an A&T, star as well, but has the potential as well. He's a redshirt freshman, so you're talking about some young quarterbacks that really see, for lack of a better term, a hole being left open for the potential of getting some time if someone stumbles. I think the rest of the team is kind of set in motion and really could be successful. All they need is someone to be able to lead this offense.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's something I was doing some research for this episode, and I think a lot of people, including myself, overlooked at times last year is when you look at the success of previous quarterbacks at A&T, they always seem to have a run game to fall back on, especially when you look back at 2019. I mean, it was Jermaine Martin. I mean, really and true, like what he could do on the ground opened up so much for the quarterback spot. And I think when you saw the run game emerge, like I think the Central game was great because I think you guys rushed for like almost 200 yards that game, and it really opened up things for Fowler. And that was one of his best games of the year. He went out there and played, and you guys dominated Central in that game, but you saw some other games where the run game couldn't get going, like the Kennesaw game, which they had a great defense last year, but the offense never caught its rhythm, and it really put a good defense in a lot of bad situations. I think if you want to extend it to that too, but I think as long as a running back emerges, the offensive line's there. Let me say this: I love the offensive line for A&T well, at least coming into the year. I think Corian Sharp and Tariq Stewart were two of our all Big South selections on the offensive line for at least our publication. And I know they were getting a lot of love in terms of the Big South Media Day poll and everything as well. So I think for Fowler, like you said, it's just growing a little bit into the role. As long as you don't regress and a run game develops, you can trust that offensive line. Some targets at the wide receiver spot emerge. I think replacing a guy like Corey Banks is going to be a tough feat as well. As long as he has some targets emerge, I expect Fowler or whoever ends up potentially taking the job. I do agree with you. It should be Fowler's to lose, but I think he's still an extremely talented quarterback, and I don't foresee him losing that job. But let's move on here to the schedule, man. I talked about this. I know we talked before the show about I had to go blind and just kind of pick this schedule. And I think before the show, we were kind of breaking it down together. But let's go over it. Which games, in your opinion, are going to be some of the toughest tests for North Carolina A&T next season?
Well, quite frankly, both of the North Carolina Central game, I think when you're talking about rivalries, anything can happen. It's not like I know, my Aggies have dominated for the last few years, just pounding Central. But I think Central has a better team. They also have North Carolina A&T's old defensive coordinator. So, we'll see how that develops for Central, because I think defensively, them being able to stop the run is the key to them winning the game, quite honestly. But I think this year, and you kind of alluded to it, the offensive line for North Carolina A&T is right there. It is, if you looked at a Chris Barnett system, it's predicated upon being able to run the football. And if Central can't stop the run, it'll still be a long day for the Eagles. But South Carolina State has all the confidence in the world as well. And they if you looked at that game last year, South Carolina State was leading that game up until Corey Fields got hurt, and so They brought the backup in. He didn't play as well, especially made them one dimensional, and so A&T did what A&T does, and that was run the football and made some big plays and actually took that game in Orangeburg. The game's in Greensboro this year, and South Carolina State has the Celebration Bowl confidence, rolling into Truist Stadium, and we'll see what happens. But if the Aggies don't play well that game, that could be a potential stumble as well. Of course, when you're looking at North Dakota State, the number one team in FCS football, perennial winner, and going to Fargo, no one wins that game. And so
Yeah.
what you're looking at, and this is, I speak as a fan and an analyst, what you're looking at is to see how your team performs. Now, not that, A&T has never sprung upsets before, but you're talking about a system in which they are able to plug and play. They do the same kinds of things at North Dakota State. So when you're talking about the way the Bison actually just, do what they do, it'll be tough. You're talking about a game that was scheduled, a few years ago when the team was in a different course, and so I wouldn't call it rebuilding for A&T. But I will say they're not as tightened or tightly wounded as those teams of the past. So right now, you're kind of like what Sam Washington said. We'll see what we can do and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So, of course, playing Duke, they've always played them close, but hadn't, sprung the upset. So, that right there is a tough schedule early. But even within the Big South, playing Campbell, anybody that's been on social media and just follows recruiting knows that Campbell is absolutely loaded. They have a lot of talent. Mike Mentor has done a phenomenal job in recruiting up there in Bowie's Creek, but they are still really young. And I'm not sure if they are ready to ascend to that level. Not playing Campbell last year, this will be something new. But I tell you what, Campbell is taking on all comers. In fact, they might be playing more HBCUs than people in HBCU conferences. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. And then just down the rest of the schedule. If you look at Charleston Southern, Gardner Webb, I think the rest of the conference foes, are capable of beating A&T. Look at what Gardner Webb did in just the craziest undisciplined football you will see from A&T. And I think that's what Coach Washington got that from, as far as we need to get this under control now. Losing that game in the last few minutes, but I think everyone else is fully has their keys and has their bright points, but I think A&T is fully capable of getting with everyone else. And I tell you what, no one really has talked about the Norfolk State matchup toward the end of the season, but Norfolk State is coming in. J.J. Davis and others, if they can get a signal caller down, I think that offense will be prolific, and they always rush the passer well. So I think even that game will go a long way to see what this squad will be. Right now, I know I know the fans kind of gave you the business when it came to you predicting 7-4. I'm gonna say 8-3 myself. Um, I think they're fully capable of winning the Big South. I don't see any reason why they don't. Just based on the improvements they've made, offensively and defensively, and the people that are coming back. They're young in spots, but I think they're fully capable. I think, but those games in particular, I pointed out initially, are definitely the toughest going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo everything you just said too. I think a team that a lot of people probably overlooking just because they don't know much about them because their first year in the Big South is Bryant too, man.
Yeah,
They've returned a lot of talent, man. That team's really good. Their quarterback Zevi stepped in as a true freshman last year unexpectedly due to injury and was the freshman of the year for the NEC. Their running back room is deep. And they're physical on the defense. I believe it's Joe Andreessen at the linebacker spot is going to be no joke for them. I think the secondary probably can use some work, but that's not a game you could sleepwalk in. But I compared the first four games to A&T as I think that those games are just as hard as what you're looking at with possibly an Alabama A&M, where you're looking and if you don't go out there and play your best football, it's not a stretch to say it's 0-4 if everything doesn't go right. Because I mean, you have Week one, Central in a rivalry game, neutral site. We'll see. And week one is so crazy. And as you know, as an analyst, hard to predict because we don't know what teams are yet. Week two, you got to go to Fargo and play North Dakota State. Week three, you go to Duke. And then week four, you have South Carolina State, who's the defending Celebration Bowl champion. So, man, there are no games in the first half of the schedule that you could sleepwalk through. And then you got the Campbell game later in the season. When you mentioned a young team, and even with Norfolk, I think if you're asking A&T fans, man, would you like to move the Central game to the end of the season so we can develop and play a young Norfolk or Campbell team early? You would do it. To get Norfolk and Campbell late in the season is actually probably going to be tougher than some of the teams that draw them early in the season because those teams are not going to be as well oiled, gelled. You know, the chemistry won't be as developed. But man, I think 7-4 is good. I said the ceiling's 8-3. I think the floor is 6-5. I think the floor would be, right there. I just don't see them having a losing record again. And I think somewhere in between 8-3, 7-4 is where it is. Like I said last night, I think the two losses are probably guaranteed as North Dakota State, Duke, and then we'll kind of see what happens with the Aggie Eagle Classic, South Carolina State. Now, I'm really high on Campbell, but you talked about the winning the Big South. This is the final year for A&T in this conference, headed to the CAA. And I've talked about it on my show. I know we've talked about it on Twitter about the pressure. Just how much pressure in your mind as a fan and analyst is on A&T to win the conference this year?
I tell you what, because all the expectations are there, I think there's a lot of pressure. But I kind of have to go back on something I said when it comes to just how much pressure, because I think going into the Colonial and just looking at those amount of teams, I think if everything kind of shapes out right, what I mean by that is if they go divisional, I don't see why they can't be in the thick of things in the southern in the south of that particular conference. If everything shakes out, which I fully expected to, just with them getting teams. So I think they'll be competitive, but I think it would say a lot that you won this conference with the expectations um, in the Big South, because there is no one that you can't beat within that conference. It's not this huge juggernaut. You don't have, Kennesaw State anymore. And even last year with basically, Murphy's Law happening, everything that does, go bad did last year. You still were competitive. You still played teams, your tough teams. I say maybe the Monmouth game didn't go as well as you wanted to, but even that game you were competitive. And in Kennesaw State, you had no offense to go at all, and you still were competitive in that game in the biggest crowd that stadium has ever had. So when you're talking about um, just them being able to compete in the CAA, it would go a long way to boost their confidence winning this conference this year and going into the Colonial and seeing what happens to develop going forward. So I think the pressure is still heavy, but I think it would go a long way to show themselves or to put themselves on good footing by winning the Big South this year.
Yeah, I mean, the only game I can think, the Monmouth game kind of got out of hand late, I would
Mhm.
say, but the Hampton game is really the only one I think that you could say A&T got smacked like
Yes.
from the jump, got caught just not showing up. And I still think A&T had a better team than Hampton last year on paper. I will say that, but it was just like you said, everything that went wrong against Hampton went wrong for A&T. And looking at it, so let's say it goes according to plan. You guys were voted preseason favorites for the Big South. You guys win the Big South, get that auto bid to the playoffs. What is the tone around A&T about? What are the expectations going into the FCS playoffs? And do you think A&T would put up a bid to try to host a playoff game?
Ooh, good question. I think they absolutely would, just because of this being the goal. I think when you're talking about, and this is just speaking, um, analyzing the move to both the Big South and then subsequently the CAA, is that you wanted to get in these playoffs. It wasn't, within your strategic plan, there were some other things that you wanted, to do. But when it comes to just purely a football standpoint, you wanted to make deep runs in the playoffs and get in there and compete for championships. And so, yeah, I think they would absolutely, try to host a game, which would be phenomenal. For what they have done and kind of the flack they've taken from me, me especially, just because I grew up within those confines, being in the MEAC conference, and I still respect that conference very heavily. But I understood the move, and understand what they're trying to do. So yeah, absolutely. I think making a run to try to host a game would be phenomenal for East Greensboro.
And before we move on to talking about some players to watch, what would a win mean in the playoffs? Like, what would a first or potentially a second round win mean for the program and the fan base surrounding North Carolina A&T? And just we can expand it to HBCU football as a whole because we understand the perception, in FCS circles about HBCUs in the playoffs. What would a win for A&T really do for that narrative and the perception around the program?
It would be huge, because I think it would solidify the move being made, in certain senses. I think it would also give another angle of what HBCU football can be, not necessarily just having to be in HBCU conferences, although I fully support HBCU conferences. I think, you know, dual domination in certain senses is a good thing. But it would spell huge. And I think, for some this might not be good, but I think you would have athletes wanting to go and try to win FCS championships, and finding out that they can do it from an HBCU. And so I think that would spell huge. I think, of course, you had Florida A&M from the SWAC go to the playoffs last year, and I think they didn't put their, I know they would say they didn't, have their best effort against Southeast Louisiana, but I think that was a feeling of wanting or saying you're in the dance, we want to compete. And so I think athletes want to compete. And if that is the level that you're playing everyone and you feel you want to go after the big prize, then, you know, A&T winning a couple of playoff games would spell huge to say we can compete amongst everyone.
Yeah, I don't think that's a stretch to say. I think we had what the FAMU tight end came out on Twitter and he caused
Yes,
a
it did.
whole stir talking about he would rather play. Now, I mean, I think we both agree. We and you have talked about it. If you're a school and you're a business and financially, playoffs don't make sense if you have an opportunity to go play for the Celebration Bowl. But if you're an athlete, it's hard to tell an athlete to think of it financially because he's not getting that money. And so for
Absolutely.
him, and those kids, they want to go win a national championship. And so I think there's a distinction to be made that people are expecting 18 to 23-year-old kids to think way outside the box there, like, oh man, I get it. Y'all get a check that I don't see. And so
Right.
never mind. I don't want to do it. But let's get to some players to watch. I think we can both agree. We should probably start with the linebacker there, Jacob Roberts, one of the best linebackers in the country, in my opinion, in the FCS. So you could speak on him a little bit, but who are some other players outside of Jacob Roberts that we should watch for the Aggies in 2022?
You know what? I kind of went, very, very young when it comes. I mean, you can speak to that entire really linebacker core. You're talking about Joseph Stuckey along with, Tyquan King as well. But I'm gonna tell you what. I'm gonna start off in the offense. The running back core. You had Mr. Tootin this year who really stepped in and was huge, with Jermaine Martin being injured a lot of the year, and really proved himself. And I think he'll get the starting nod. But behind him, you got two other backs, that toted the mail last year as well. Charlie Dixon, 6'2", 225-pound, just thumper, coming in, that I think will get significant time, really got a buzz, going into the spring game. But along with him, Wesley Graves, 5'9", 225, redshirt freshman. He also got significant time in the running back position. And the great thing about that is they're all young. They are all young. So you're talking about, again, I speak to offensive coordinator Chris Barnett, and what he likes to do, and which is the pound the rock. You have three solid running backs, that are coming in and doing their thing. But along with that, you're talking about some people, local product, Jaheim Pittman, 6'3", 295, true freshman, that is coming in and really adding depth to a spot that probably is not as deep as A&T would like them in the defensive tackle positions. You got a couple that are there that have some experience, but I think you'll see Pittman with some significant time. So just a few names. I already mentioned Karan Prunty, who's coming from Kansas. Got that time. When you're talking about, the wide receiver position, Jamison Warren, you're talking about Zach Leslie, who's been there, seen it all, done it all. But here's a name: Jakari Caldwell is another name. Um, you just seen a great deal of size. There are some small wide receivers here. You're talking about a core, along with Burkhalter, 6'4", 195 pounders, and they go along with the mode of what's going on. Being, you had some breakaway receivers, but along with that, you have a lot of possession receivers. All A&T seeks to do is move the chains. If they break, if they break along with, great, but the offense is predicated upon moving the chains, staying ahead of the chains, being able to run the football, resting your defense, letting them be able to go eat. And so they have some players that they've been able to get that are transfers. In fact, when you're talking about Caldwell, I think he's coming in from South Carolina. South Carolina transferred and got some time there. So I think when you're looking at the way they've recruited and brought in, used the transfer portal, I won't say they're Alabama A&M esque, but they have used their transfers to kind of set the success in motion down in Greensboro.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, all those guys are great, and listen, A&T's deep this year at some key positions too, man. I thought you mentioned that, and depth is so important, especially offense and defensive lineman. If you can't rotate your D lineman in today's age of college football, not winning anything. I'm just gonna put that out there. You have to keep fresh bodies. And the last topic, man, before I wanted to let you go, I know you're a busy guy, is this is something I guess as an FCS guy I've never really understood is just the backlash that A&T consistently gets just across, man, fans, social media, like anything A&T does, it seems like there is somebody from another school, like, on top of it, saying something about it. Why do you think A&T is a target of so much just I would say, I don't know, just the target of everybody who's not a North Carolina A&T fan in terms of just the HBCU space?
Blue, we are arrogant. Let me put it this way. I think every fan base is arrogant. They have pride in their squad. We're the largest HBCU, public HBCU, there is. And so we're almost at 14,000, students. We've been successful over the last 10 years, especially. I think with that Aggie pride that we speak of is boisterous, and some people don't like that, and that's fine. You know, I get it. But I think the moves that we've made as a school, I don't mind the questions. I don't even mind the criticism and the analysis when it comes to what you're going to be. But I think um, A&T has done the job of making sure that they make moves based on what is best for the institution. And I think some people are intimidated by that. And I think some people don't like that. And I get it. Again, I don't mind the criticism and the analysis, but A&T will always do what's best for A&T. Also, we don't mind mixing it up with other folks as well. When it comes to, we are still in HBCU, we are still, just as aware of what goes on with other people as ever. And some people don't like the fact that we've decided not to be a part of an HBCU conference, and that for some, we're no longer allowed to comment on anyone else when it comes to their football or their athletics in general. But we still will. We still will. And like I said, some people have more diplomatic approaches than others. Because I'm an analyst, I will always cut it right down the middle. I try to let my fandom be where it is. When it comes to, I'll celebrate ball when it comes to my team, but when it comes to analyzing, I analyze. I try to keep it down the middle as much as possible. I was as critical as most when it comes to the conference moves and what are you doing, and the Big South move. What are we doing? What's going on here? And then supported my squad afterwards. But you know, when it all comes down to it, there are some people that feel like the moves that we made, being a successful HBCU, didn't merit leaving the MEAC. And I'm pretty sure the powers that be didn't anticipate what happened to the Big South, and then going to the
Yeah.
CAA. But when you're talking about one of the most successful conferences in the FCS and being invited to it, and your strategic plan kind of fits in with what you want to do there, it's a no brainer. So people may not like it. Like I said, again, I've been critical of it, but I understand it, and so I still support my institution, and it'll be what it is. I'm still gonna have fun with the SWAC. I'm still gonna have fun with the SIAC. I'm still gonna have fun with the CIAA. We can all banter and keep it, fun and entertaining and clean. But um, when it comes to being critical of whether or not you're still in HBCU, that's where I kind of draw the line, because that is a federal designation, and we are still um, as much a historically black college and university as anyone else, regardless of what conference affiliation we are in.
I mean, hey, I agree. That was my biggest thing, man. Like that's something I guess as an outsider, I guess you would call me, or whatever. I've never understood because when people jumped on Jackson State for the FBS talk, everyone was like, "Oh, you're a hater if you don't support it." But then A&T is like, "Listen, we got a different map. We got a different loading dock in this game or whatever. We're gonna go off this way." Everyone was like, "You can't do that. You got to follow this blueprint." I'm like, Everyone's got their own path, and at the end of the day, everyone's trying to get FBS. That really and truly at the end of the day, and so never really understood the criticism for trying to take their own path per se. And people can criticize the Big South move all they want. In my opinion, when you look at where A&T ended up, man, like, I mean, you can't I don't know if you can, like you said, hate the move necessarily. Like, yes, the listen, and this goes for everyone. No AD in the country, from Alabama to North Dakota State to Jackson State to A&T to FAMU to down to the D2 level, thought that the COVID time would bring about so much conference realignment, and that we would see the ASUN and WAC snatch teams, OVC and this conference merged. The Southland is dead, and now it's back to 8 teams. And I don't think anyone foresaw that coming, and especially the move by James Madison, Sam Houston State, and Jacksonville State really kind of came out of nowhere and caught a lot of people off guard. And we still have teams who are flirting with the next level. And so, in my opinion, real hard to blame A&T for that. But like you said, everyone's kind of got a different perception. And man, before we get out of here, do you feel like A&T is on the right path to make the ultimate move? Because I feel like you've been vocal, I've been vocal that the ultimate goal is FBS. Are they on the right path? And when do you foresee them really trying to make that jump to the next level?
I think when you're talking about budgets and talking about raising the kind of money you need to be competitive, I think that is still a 5 to 10 year move. But I think with the changes coming up in what football is going to be, what college football is going to be in the next few years, I can't say for sure what it'll be, because I think
Yeah.
we're in such unknown territory right now when it comes to football, because I'm not sure exactly when it settles out. You kind of commented, even you know talking about no one could have seen COVID coming and the arms race that it became. I know, Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, and I got the term from him, the conference churning term. And it does happen ever so often, but I don't. But at this rate and at this magnitude, I don't think no one has seen. So I'm not sure exactly where you're talking about as far as timetables, but I think that is eventually the goal. I think based on everything that's happening with the school, with the with with and I'm just talking about not just the athletic dynamic, but just everything that's going on. This school is growing leaps and bounds. They're getting the support from the state that they need. They're getting research dollars. It wouldn't surprise me that they go FBS one day, but I don't think they're in a hurry. I think they want to grow this thing organically. and get into the right situation. And so I think that they definitely could, along with the other, with some other schools within the footprint of the Southeast. And if that can happen, if you can have a group be able to do that at one time, you know, they're definitely one of the schools in consideration just based on who they are and where they're located. But I think dominating FCS is that number one goal. Not even dominating, just navigating it and being successful at it. I think is the number one goal. But I don't see why they can't. And we throw around the FBS label. We don't know what FBS is going to be in a
Yeah.
few years. So we'll see.
That's 100% fact. I know there's been some talk around Jacksonville State and Sam Houston that they're having some second thoughts about moving up right now because I mean, I don't know about you. I don't have much confidence in the CUSA in terms of overall standing if things kind of hit the fan with the Power Five leaving. And I talked with Sam Herder about some of that, but man, the question marks are more than the knowns right now in terms of FBS and FCS realignment. But guys, man, this is our North Carolina A&T preview, man. Jamie, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. 40 minutes of just straight North Carolina A&T talk. I'm sure there's gonna be some SWAC fans that are gonna have some thoughts. I'm assuming on the show, but listen, man, where can people find you? All the work, all the great work you do. I see you got your Twitter bio right there, man. But where can they follow you throughout the season? And what do you have coming down the pipeline as kickoff's only 12 days away?
Wow, man. Hey, look. First of all, I love the SWAC fans. I love them. Listen, I enjoy the SWAC football, and I'm gonna be down there. Please understand, I'm gonna be all over Jackson State. I'm gonna be all over A&M. Trust me, I still enjoy it. But you can find me, of course, on Twitter, Sport Voice JW. I will be calling some games on ESPN Plus for the SIAC, so you will see me. I think I have 4 games that I'll be either doing play-by-play or color. Um, Along with that, I probably will be calling a few games on the Black College Sports Network. So you'll see me on whatever app we'll be on. So it's no telling as that schedule is being solidified. But you'll always see me on Twitter, man. I'll make a comment. I'll get in and get out and start a fire and leave.
Listen, one of the best follows on Twitter for sure, man. My guy, Jamie Walker. Make sure to follow him on Twitter, all the social media platforms, and stay tuned for all the great stuff I know he's got coming down the pipeline for the 2022 season. But, guys, for Jamie, for myself, and for the Blue Bloods, we are out for right now.